once their processes are legal in our community. And so, once again, I think we're helping the nation do the right thing.
Gentleman's time has expired. The chair recognizes the gentlelady, Ms. Scanlon.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Our colleagues on the other side of the aisle seem to have called this hearing to really promote fear-mongering or disinformation in order to justify a radical plan that would effectively shut down asylum to everyone. And the plan is so extreme that their Republican colleagues have objected that it's ineffective, inhumane, and even un-American. And what I find particularly pernicious is the attempt to conflate the issues of migrants seeking legal asylum through our legal processes with the very real scourge of fentanyl trafficking, which, as CBP data demonstrates and Judge Samaniego has testified, overwhelmingly comes through the ports of entry in trucks and cargo ships, not on the backs of migrants trying to flee poverty or violence in their home countries. By falsely suggesting that migrant families seeking asylum are the source of the fentanyl epidemic, we can't even start to craft policy measures that could actually address either of these issues, the fentanyl crisis or the humanitarian issues raised by the push factors in South and Central America and our immigration laws. So I don't want to waste this opportunity, and since most of my experience before coming to Congress has to do with how badly broken our immigration laws are, I just wanted to focus there. How do we handle the increase in asylum seekers at the southern border with real fixes like some of those that Judge Samaniego has suggested? As I suggested, we do need to address the root causes of migration, but we need to have functioning pathways here in this country that people can pursue. I mean, I've represented enough folks seeking asylum to know that there aren't functional pathways. I think we heard a statistic that only a small percentage of people seeking asylum are actually entitled to it. That's not true. The statistics vary very widely across the country, but in some areas, particularly on the border where there are less friendly judges often, the rates are very, very different than in other areas across the country. So, Judge Samaniego, you are not an immigration judge, are you? You don't adjudicate asylum claims.
We do not.
Okay, I did want to clarify that. Now, a couple years ago, I had the opportunity to visit the border and speak with Customs and Border Patrol, Homeland Security agents, and advocates, and did see that there is a humane processing process available there. And I really appreciate that. Why do you think that's been so successful over the years, particularly when compared with other cities and counties along the border?
I think one is that we've accepted to be humanitarian, and when you do not start at that point, then you don't create processes, you don't create ways to handle them, the NGOs are not working with you, the Border Patrol doesn't work with you. So I think the moment that you make that determination that you're going to be humanitarian, it forces you to come up with systems to help out. And there are some, for example, there's things that we could do. The Venezuelan population dropped tremendously as soon as the Border Patrol has an app that you can now, from your country, you can begin to apply. And we're talking about vetting the credible fear. So you're able to do a little bit of that, and the numbers drop tremendously. I think also I was able to talk to the ambassador from the U.S. to Mexico, and he talked about what do we do at the origin. The point of origin is very important because we know that, for example, why is Colombia not treating Venezuelans properly, and then Venezuelans have to leave their country to come to our country. And so it's not just a pull that we have a push that we need to look at as well. And so, I think if we get creative, but I think once you start with the idea that you have to, it's safety, that we have to make sure that the economy is taken care of. El Paso was one of the strongest economies in all of Texas. We were one of the strongest. And so while we're dealing with the situation, we have to worry about the economy. So the economy, the safety, and being able to do the right things from a humanitarian. I think if you start from that premise, I think things are more solvable. If you start from the premise that you don't want them here, then what's the solution?
Well, and I do want to pick up on that because over the past few months, Texas's governor has sent dozens of busloads of vulnerable migrants to Philadelphia, which I represent, without notice or coordination, which of course has made it more difficult for our willing city authorities to welcome those folks. But when you have 2 buses dumped on New Year's Eve morning before 6 o'clock, and you have vulnerable people without coats, it's very difficult. So I appreciate your insight that cooperation can smooth over many of the issues that we're dealing with. I see my time has expired. I yield back.
Thank you, Congresswoman.
I recognize the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Tiffany.
Judge Samaniego, you said in one of your answers earlier that people come here because they're passionate, and you've advocated for allowing people to come in here. Do you think that's a reason why we should allow people into America on a legal basis, because they're passionate to come to America?
Well, no, I said they were here for different reasons. They just happen to be passionate as an additional component. I mean, they come because they're fearing what's happening in their community. I've talked to, like I said earlier, when they tell you that every day their mom or their dad calls them and says they come here looking for you every morning and they want to know where you're at, that's why they're moving in this direction.
Thank you. I'm really glad this issue in regards to Governor Abbott moving people to various cities around the country has come up. Have you been critical of Governor Abbott for what he's done?
Absolutely, absolutely, because when you send someone that's not organized and they don't know who's on that bus, and some of them are not sponsored, that's a huge burden on that community.
Have you been critical of the Biden administration when they've flown people all over the country in the dark of night?
I don't know of that taking place. I apologize.
So you have not seen, for example, I have an article here entitled "Biden Administration Quietly Flies Illegal Immigrants to New York in Middle of Night," and we just heard from a fellow member on this panel saying they're doing it in Philadelphia also. Do you think that's right for the Biden administration to do that?
Well, I think it's an indication of that they have to decompress, because when we get flights that are going out, it's to decompress the system there with the Border Patrol and has nothing to do with their community.
So did you give the benefit of the doubt to Governor Abbott and say, well, maybe they're decompressing these people on their trips to these cities?
Well,
I mean, isn't it the same thing, Judge Samaniego?
No, it isn't, because it's not coordinated. We've never gotten a call from the governor to tell us, hey, what do you need? How can we help? How can we do things?
No,
and we just get buses.
I really appreciate that. Biden administration quietly flies illegal immigrants to New York in the middle of the night. That's what they're doing. We'll be happy to share this article with you so you can see what's happening there. Thank you for your answer. Sheriff Daniels, I was in your county in June of 2020. What's changed since June of 2020?
Well, we went from, just to put it in perspective, around 5% of my jail population was border-related, up to almost 45% now, 45%. We've seen the pursuits. Last year, we put 180 people in jail for pursuits that were deadly pursuits. When I say deadly, driving at 100 miles an hour plus, endangering communities. Some resulted in deaths. Some we interdicted before they killed somebody. We see the flow of public safety challenges in our community based on this border every day. So it's changed drastically as a result of this border.
Because what I heard from you sheriffs is that there was good coordination all the way from the local level, all the way up to the federal government, June of 2020. And that there was some control the border was becoming more secure. Is that generally an accurate statement?
Yes, Congressman. In fact, Border Patrol, when I pull up to the scene to help my deputies, the troopers, officers, or agents, they always make a point to come over and say, Sheriff, thank you for what you do. Thanks for being a voice for us.
We heard earlier that, I can't remember who it was that said that the increased fentanyl is not tied to illegal border crossings. Do you agree with that statement?
No.
And why not?
The criminal cartels are exploiting our border, whether they're trafficking children, adults, males, females, whether they're human smuggling for profit, or they're doing illicit drugs. Either way, the criminal cartels are exploiting a border, and I keep hearing the word, different words about how it's controlled. It's not effectively managed right now, and until it is, the cartels are they're the winners of this.
Those of you on the other side of the aisle, you can continue to wear blinders, or you can do photo op trips like the president did down to El Paso, where they clean up that region before he comes in. You can do that. But the American people are seeing very clearly what's going on. And now that we're in the majority, we're going to try to identify this as much as possible, because you're hearing the truth here from people like the sheriff, from the fentanyl families. And I hope you're meeting with those fentanyl families, because it's directly tied to the border. I want to just close with this. I hope as we go through this process, we also get more information out in regards to the NGOs, the International Organization for Migration, which has weaponized immigration into this country all the way from Panama up to the southern border. I hope we dig in deep to those NGOs that are complicit in the greatest human trafficking operation perhaps in the history of the world. I yield back.
Chair recognizes gentlelady from Pennsylvania. Is that right, Ms. Dean?
Yes.
Okay, Ms. Dean.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you to all our testifiers for being here today. We benefit from your experience and your service and your knowledge and your heartbreaking family experience. You know, before I ran for Congress, I was a professor. For 10 years, I taught at LaSalle University in Philadelphia, teaching writing and rhetoric and ethics. And that's why I can't help noticing the words so often used by my Republican colleagues when we're talking about both of these tragic issues. Words like hordes, invasion, crisis, open border. It's purposeful. They want the American people to be scared. They want us to feel threatened. They want to create divisions because othering people makes it far easier to mistreat them. The reality is there is no invasion. There are no hordes of invaders. Our borders are not being overrun by dangerous criminals. But we do have a broken immigration system. At the same time, we are suffering with an extraordinary, deadly drug problem in our country. Mr. Dunn and Mrs. Dunn, Ms. Janelle, my extraordinary heartfelt sympathy to you on the loss of dear Noah, poisoned by fentanyl, as you have written here in your testimony. My family knows a little bit about drugs and poisoning, but from a different perspective, my son is a recovering addict, and it is by the grace of God that he did not run into the deadly fentanyl that would have taken his life. But we must be able to talk about these things honestly and not conflate them, as my colleague just said. There's a difference between the facts and the rhetoric, between wanting to solve these problems or just trying to make people afraid of them. The fact is, 90% of fentanyl, heroin, and meth seized in this country is captured at ports of entries. Just about everybody who has spoken to us has said this. This means that drugs are being brought in through normal channels, not on the backs of families crossing at remote parts of the country. The vast majority I'm talking about. I'm sure it's not 100%. In fact, CBP reports that drug cartels are now recruiting Americans to bring fentanyl into this country, not undocumented immigrants. And we have a horrific problem. Like your dear Noah, we are losing more than 100,000 people a year to overdose. More than 70% of those fentanyl. I wear this band for the son, a 24-year-old son who died of an overdose, fentanyl poisoning. And sadly, it's not one anymore. This band now represents at least a half a dozen in my community whose children have lost their lives. But let's get serious about it. Let's stop demonizing the immigrant who comes and asks for help. Judge Samaniego, I understand, and I have been to El Paso, to the port of entry. It's the second busiest border crossing in the United States. You interact with a large number of these people who are, and they're people seeking safety and humane treatment. Can you tell us just a couple snippets of why they are coming across?
And I said earlier, a large number that you hear is that they were in their country, they were abused, they try to defend themselves, and they get targeted. That's one big category, where they're just trying to do the right thing in their own country, but their own country rejects them, and then they target them. That's a big part of it. And a lot of it, like I said, is just, it's not, the economy plays a second part of it. Obviously, the economy is worse, and that's not a reason to come to our country because of the economy. But they're really driven by the fact that they can no longer live in their communities.
And we know that we've seen these numbers for a large number of years, not just under the Biden administration. I think in your testimony you wrote at least the last 4 years you've had increased numbers.
Absolutely.
Can you speak to what you also said in your testimony, which is this, what I'm so concerned about, which is the false racist narrative that is being promoted here today and is promoted day after day here in Congress?
Well, you know, if anybody's concerned with that, it's us. I mean, that narrative was picked up by a shooter that, you know, at the Walmart situation, and we hear that, and it concerns us as a community when you say racism and invasion and all of these things. It makes our community extremely nervous because then we might get targeted for being that community and for being humanitarian. And so I do ask, you know, for these words to be settled in a different way. You know, you don't need to say invasion and, you know, all of these things that are happening across the border. We're a community that works really hard. You know, we're very privileged with what we have, and it's just very concerning when we hear this because we don't know if we're going to be targeted because of these comments.
And I know my time is up. I thank all three of you for your service. And Mr. Dunn, I thank you for your wish to educate people about the extraordinary dangers to our children.
The gentlelady's time has expired. Chair recognizes the gentleman from New Jersey, Mr. Van Drew.
Thank you, Chairman. First of all, Mr. Dunn, as everybody else has said, and I know we've been repetitive, but it really is heartfelt. We feel for you as somebody who, I'm a grandfather, I'm getting older, and a father, and I can't imagine. I cannot imagine, and I will tell you, and I mean this sincerely, that I will pray for you and for your family. I don't know, sometimes I think the world's upside down, and the more that time goes on, especially recently, it seems upside down to me. So I have to talk about a few of the things that I heard my colleagues on the other side say that, for example, this hearing was a show. The hearing's not a show. In order to determine how to effectively fix something, you have to study it, you have to learn about it, and you have to hear about it. And that's what this hearing's about. It's not a show, and it's also not anti-immigration. None of these Republicans, and I'm sure none of the Democrats, are anti-immigration. But we are anti-illegal immigration. There is a difference. There is the rule of law. I don't know where we've lost that, and that's what I mean by the world being upside down. The rule of law, that you follow laws and things happen in a certain way. And the other secret here that people sometimes don't want to talk about is no country that's ultimately successful for a long period of time has wide open borders. Yes, there can be border problems. America's had border problems. Many countries have had border problems. But nevertheless, you can't say that you can just have completely open borders. If that's true, let's just open our country completely to every single country in the world and say we have no borders, and as many people want to come here can come here, whether they're sick or not, whether they have other issues or not, whether drugs are coming in or not. And yes, drugs are coming in because the cartels are helping these people to get across and using them. And human trafficking is happening, and human abuse is happening. I'm sorry, Judge, but it is. And if you talk to people down there, I know the people you talk to don't see it and hear it, but the people that I do, and we're going to go again real soon, do see it and hear it. It's true. It's real. And you know, I kind of empathized with the Sheriff Daniels, when you spoke about Secretary Mayorkas, because I've had the opportunity to ask him questions a number of times when I was on the Homeland Security Committee, and the guy doesn't tell the truth. Nobody wants to say it openly, but I will. The guy's a liar. He does not tell the truth. And when he tells you he's going to look at something, he doesn't. When he tells you he's going to do something, he doesn't. When you show him a video of terrible things happening, once it was a video of a young officer actually saving somebody's life that was drowning, and they found out that it was a drug dealer whose life he saved. By the way, the officer died. That's the truth. The truth is we have a problem. And the truth is that we need borders that are effective and we need borders that are sealed. And the truth is, it is Biden's. I'll be the partisan one here. It is Biden's problem because in 2 years it's radically changed. When President Trump put together a strong array of immigration policies at stemming the flow of illegal immigrant crossings, there was so much of a reduction. It was so much safer. It was getting better. It was working. And you know what? Legal immigrants don't like the illegal immigration. They don't want to be mixed into that. And his very first day in office, President Biden decimated this process. He ignored the experts. He ignored the expert advice of those serving at the borders. He turned his back on the millions of Americans that live in border communities. Does anybody care about all these people that are being overrun? Well, we're all going to care soon because we're all going to be overrun. And that's not hyperbole. It's not extreme. They're being shipped all over the country. He ended the construction of the wall. He refused to deport any illegal immigrants for the first 100 days, so he terminated the declaration of a national emergency at the southern border, all in one single day. Did we put out a message that we wanted illegal immigration? Absolutely. And you know all the things that have happened since and how many gotaways have got away. But I wanted to ask something to the sheriff, because I don't have time. I'd love to talk on this longer. Kamala Harris was appointed the border czar. So that means she should know this border in and out and in every way, along with Mayorkas. Has she? Have you had a lot of interaction with her? I'm done talking, but can he answer that at least?
Yes, gentleman's time has expired. You may answer that question.
No.
No. I hope everybody heard that. That's the answer. That's the truth.
Okay, thank you. The gentleman's time has expired. Recognize the gentlelady from Texas, Ms. Escobar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to also join my colleagues, Mr. Dunn, in expressing my heartfelt sympathies and condolences for the loss of your son. Sheriff Daniels, thank you for your service to your community and to our country. And again, Judge Samaniego, I'm so grateful for your compassionate and strategic leadership and your partnership with the federal government. Really appreciate your testimony here as well. You know, for anyone who really, truly wants to understand what's happening at the border and to depoliticize this, we've got to take a step back and acknowledge that what we have been seeing is an historic refugee crisis impacting our Western Hemisphere. And it started in 2014 as we began seeing record numbers of unaccompanied minors, and it has continued through the years. When folks credit Donald Trump for limiting migration, I want you to look at what the data shows, which is the only time we saw a drop during the Trump administration was in the weeks after the country and the world shut down because of COVID. And the apprehensions began increasing again before the November general election in 2020. So let's operate in truth and facts, or we won't be able to achieve any solutions together. And I'll tell you, there's no one who wants a safe, secure, well-managed border than those of us who live and work on the border, than those of us who raise our children on the border, those of us who have pledged our service to the border. So to my Republican colleagues, I will work with anyone who wants to achieve what I hope we all want to achieve. And so how do we do that? How do we solve this challenge? I'll tell you how we don't do it. We don't keep doing more and more of the same. The definition of doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result is insanity. What have we been doing for decades in America? We've been addressing immigration as a border-only issue, and that is an expensive failure. So how do we solve this? Number one, Congress needs to open up legal pathways. We haven't done that in decades. For many of these migrants, there is no line for them to get into. There's no right way for them to use, except for asylum, which is legal. We should also recognize that our country needs immigrants. I don't know about you all, but every CEO I talk to says, we need a labor force. I have had CEOs from different parts of the country tell me, can we have some of those asylum seekers in our community? Because we can't get anybody to go to work. So we need to recognize how advantageous immigration is for America. We also need to modernize our processing and include a federal civilian workforce so that, Judge, you don't have to step in and fill in where the federal government has failed. Most importantly, we can depoliticize this work and work for real solutions. So if we want to end the scourge of fentanyl, I sure wish my Republican colleagues would have voted for the bipartisan infrastructure law, which funds technology at our ports. If you want to help defeat the cartels, fund the president's budget as he applies historic resources to do this. If you want to erode the power of the cartels, advocate to end Title 42. And if you want to secure the border, I sure wish you would have voted for historic funding for the Department of Homeland Security in December. But every member of the Republican Party, every colleague actually on this panel who is a Republican voted against that funding. And in fact, in December, President Biden asked for $5 billion for the Department of Homeland Security. Republicans cut that in half and then voted against it. Judge, in that funding was money for communities like ours, for governments like yours that help partner with us. If the Republicans would have had their way, and if that funding wouldn't have made it to you to help, who or what agency would have been hurt the most?
Oh, my goodness. Just a fact of not having the funding, obviously everybody gets hurt because now NGOs have to step in without any money. Everything gets shifted away from what they need to do. I can tell you FEMA helping us really took that was such an incredible opportunity for us to be able to shelter, to process, to do the things that we wanted to do in a very organized manner.
And when you can't help, what agency has to pick up the burden? What federal law enforcement agency?
Well, the Border Patrol.
That's right.
Border Patrol. They feel, that's why we have such a great relationship, because they know that if we weren't doing our job with the community, they would have to have, there's 1,200, they have 1,200 beds available. Sometimes they got as much as 5,500. When we help them, the flow comes through, they're feeling good about it, and we take all that pressure away from the federal government.
Thank you, Judge. My time has expired. I yield back.
Right now. Before we go to our next interlocutor, I guess, do any of you need like a 5 or 10 minute break? We do. Okay, so we're going to recess for 10 minutes, or the sound of the gavel. We're in recess.